Welcome to part 3 of the Matrix and the U.S. Constitution. This part right here, the bar, the Constitution, and the Illuminati or the Illuminated ones, this part right here is, yeah, this part right here is big. And if you've made it this far in your journey, of course, I bid you Godspeed on your continued interest in this subject because this is going to put a lot of things in perspective for you. With that said, let's jump right in. Let's not waste any time.
The bar. There has never been a law on the books created by the Congress which made it illegal for a common man to practice law. Every judge of a district, circuit, or appeal court, except justices and magistrates, is a lawyer and a member of the bar. These judges have the authority to establish local rules of court, and those mentioned have created a local rule that prevents common people from representing any other person in their court or to practice law without a license. A license requires that you produce your bar association number. For those who don't know, the Bar Association is simply a lawyers' union, and when lawyers are accepted into the bar, they're required to swear allegiance to a foreign power. The American Bar Association is a branch of a national organization titled the National Lawyers Guild Communist Party, and can be found recorded in the United States Code at 28 U.S.C. 3002, Section 15A. They become so big and entrenched, they no longer fear reprisal. Whenever I tell people that there is no actual law that makes it a crime to represent another person in court, the reaction is, I remind them that Abraham Lincoln and Clarence Darrow never went to law school or passed the bar. But the reaction is understandable because the bar is a very powerful organization and its members have infiltrated every niche of American life and business. How many times in your life have you heard you can't practice law without a license? I've heard it said in numerous movies spanning 100 years, and my mother's soaps, and my comedians and jokes, and theatrical skits. I've seen the phrase in print in newspaper articles, magazines, and heard it on the radio. Before I learned the truth about this fact, even my personal lawyer made that comment to me. We all have been brainwashed to believe a lie, and because we've heard it so often from people we trust, and who are supposed to have our best interests at heart, we all just assume it must be true. How many other lies have you assumed it must be true? Not long ago, while doing some research, I came across a document that was very interesting. It concerned a matter of a lien filed against the Washington State Bar Association by an ex-attorney by the name of Stephen L. Wisney. And this particular lien has had some international significance associated with it because he has sold this lien to various individuals over the past 10 years. What is interesting is that he hasn't been charged with fraud or anything like that with this particular lien. But there's a document on the internet called Letter to Supreme Court Chief Justice Jerry Alexander. And what it was all about is Wisney had got a default judgment against a judge. And the judge the judge over his case refused to sign it. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and he ended up getting disbarred. So when you look him up on the internet, they're going to call him a fake. You know how they do, they call everybody fakes, he's a fraud, and so forth. But if you read this particular document, I think you're going to have a change of heart and have some insight into what this particular bar attorney was talking about. There's a section in there where he actually talks about the Bar Association. And right here on page 3, we read, in spite of the absolute and clear law material to this matter, on the 29th day of October 2002, a private nonprofit organization that claims to be directed by you and, under some fiction, owned by your office, calling itself the Washington State Bar Association, employed members of the 25th largest law firm in the United States with instructions for them to fabricate and send a most vicious and fraudulent attack letter to the Washington State Bar Association's Office of Disciplinary Counsel, a very long and impressive title for something that does not lawfully exist, and a copy to co-prevailing party and co-plaintiff herein, Stephen L. Wisney. It is a maxim of law that no man shall take advantage of his own wrong, Lord Edward C. Coke. Now, down here in brackets was something interesting. It says this Washington State Bar Association thing closely resembles a resurrected version of an outlawed 1612 ecclesiastical tribunal, but unlike the 17th century church lawyers they seek to emulate, your vassals more resemble a pack of not too bright but dangerous, obsequious hounds. So right here we can see this lawyer kind of revealing some things. Me myself, I checked on the Bar Association in California because a judge called me out and said I was practicing, am I practicing law without a license? And I responded, well, I wasn't aware that the practice of law had to be licensed. And after that, we went home and we sent certified mail letters to the bar associations along with a $100 money order for copies of attorneys' bar license. They said they returned and said they didn't have it. They said the Supreme Court has it. We wrote them, and they also said we know nothing of it. And the clerk at the Supreme Court, had put in my letter in her return envelope. She didn't mention it in her correspondence, but she just happened to put a case that was in my envelope, and it was of a gentleman up in Seattle who is suing the California Bar Association, saying that all the attorneys are practicing law without a license. What I found out in doing the investigation is that the Supreme Court allows them to come in and practice law once they get their bar card. There's no real license per se. I've never seen a license. If somebody out there has one, please, pull it out and show us what it looks like, because I have yet to see what a license to practice law looks like. I mean, who is the agency that regulates that? A license to practice law. Never seen one. The Constitution. Our American society has been lied to by the government and lawyers more times than you will sign your name in your lifetime. We've been indoctrinated, brainwashed to believe that the Constitution was created for we the people. The purpose behind these lies is to make you believe that you are free, safe, protected, and secure, and it is all an hallucination. How many of you have studied each line of the Constitution, the statute at large, and the Articles of Confederation, armed with a reputable dictionary or law dictionary from that era? If you take the time to do this, you will soon discover that the true purpose of the Constitution was to create a business plan and to establish a military government for the protection of the Founding Fathers, the King's commerce, protection of his agents, and the future control of his subject slaves. Even the preamble of the U.S. Constitution is a clue to the lie, and which states, to ourselves and our posterity. If you never saw the title, the Constitution, and you were never told what this document was about, what do you think would be your first impression upon hearing or reading to ourselves and our posterity? The Constitution is not for we the people, and America is a matrix of misinformation. In the eyes of those in control, America is nothing more than a large plantation, and we the people are the slaves. In many U.S. and world treaties, the term high contracting powers is used to define your masters. Everyone else is considered by them to be their slaves. All the Founding Fathers had two things in common. They all shared the gift of a good education or gifted individuals, and they all came from families of business and or substance. These men all suffered from visions of grandeur. They viewed America as their one opportunity to make them powerful and wealthy, to ourselves and our posterity. Initially, their plan was to steal America away from the king, despite the fact that King George funded the exploration of the New World, which legally gave him first claim to all new continents discovered. The seizure of the Americas by the king's explorers was not as it has been depicted in our history books presented to us by our government and our government-controlled public schools. Native Americans, the Indians, were murdered, their villages burned, many were enslaved, infected by disease brought from England, and their lands taken by force and the threat of force by these early explorers. The Indians were labeled savages by these immigrant explorers from England, but the true savages were our English ancestors. One thing the Founding Fathers did not know was that all of the king's lands and all future acquisitions, such as the Americas, have been given in pledge by King John to Pope Innocent III and the Holy Roman Church by the Treaty of 1213. After that fact was proven to the founding fathers, King George and the representatives from the Vatican decided to use the constitutional draft created by the founding fathers to further their plan to control the colonists. Control attained by bringing the colonists to their knees in debt. Any way you read it, the Constitution was never written with the intent of benefiting the American people. Did you know that 98% of the law schools in America and England do not include constitutional law as a part of their law curriculum? The reason for this phenomenon is because constitutional law does not apply to or affect the enforcement of statutes, codes, or administrative regulations, which have replaced constitutional law, the common law, public law, and penal law, and which have been designed to control you. In other words, constitutional law is taught as an elective at Harvard, Yale, and Cambridge, and only for students of law who are planning a future career in government. This should make sense to you as you read on. The Revolutionary War. In the true history of America, neither side won the Revolutionary War. At first, the appearance of English troops in the colonies was simply a show of force by King George, intended to intimidate the colonists and force them to pay him taxes. Factually, back in England, English soldiers refused to take up arms against the colonists because they were English citizens and relatives. Mr. Mayor Amschel Bauer, founder of the Rothschild banking empire, by this time owned the king. Mr. Bauer had extended unlimited credit to the king and arranged contracts with him, which permitted the Rothschild tax collectors to represent and collect the king's tax from the king's subjects. This is the origin of the concept behind the establishment of the IRS. It was Bauer who suggested to King George that he enforce a tax against the colonists in the New World, since the tax being collected in England was barely enough to pay the interest on the king's loans. When English soldiers refused to fight, Mr. Bauer negotiated a contract with unemployed Russian Germanic soldiers to fight for King George at a cost of 50 cents a day. Bauer then informed King George that he had hired these soldiers in the king's name, but at a cost of $1 a day. King George utilized these soldiers, dressed them in English soldier uniforms, and ordered his career officers to command them. When a show of force in the colonies failed, Mr. Bauer suggested that King George finance the colonists in their war efforts against him and bring the colonists to their knees in debt. The king succeeded in accomplishing this through his appointed civilian figureheads in charge of his government of France. Mr. Bauer wanted to expand his banking empire into the colonies. He discovered that the colonists didn't trade in gold or silver, but used script as the basis of their economy. The script money used were promissory notes printed by the colonists. All the colonists agreed that they would consider these notes the lawful currency of the colonies. Mr. Bauer wanted gold or silver and induced the king to demand that his tax in the colonies be paid in gold or silver. It was that condition that broke the camel's back and caused the Boston Tea Party. Whoever controls the money controls the country. Rothschild. Surreptitiously, King George infiltrated the colonies in their futile attempts to form a new government, using spies composed of English lawyers and English aristocrats loyal to him. The spies' assignment was to infiltrate the new government, carry out the plan to defeat the colonists through debt, and establish regular reports to the king. The church also had their appointed representatives in place to protect and ensure that their interest is being observed. Much of the loans received from the French went into the pockets of the founding fathers. The founding fathers eventually conceded to King George the Holy Roman Church's demands, by through the intervention and persuasiveness of the king's spies. Ironically, the common denominator or glue that eventually bound King George, the founding fathers, the English lawyers, and English aristocrats together was a secret society called the Illuminati. Even Paul Revere and Benjamin Franklin were members of the Illuminati. This secret society had a criminal and deadly past in Europe, and in America they were eventually renamed the Free and Accepted Masons. The majority of the regular membership of the Free and Accepted Masons do not know about the Illuminati influence within their rank and file. The Illuminati members operate out of a special secret society separate from the regular Masonic membership and are found in every branch of the Free and Accepted Masons of the world. Think about the colonists who we have been taught to revere by our public school system. All of these individuals were members of this secret society, and all were traitors. Our history books also instruct us to apothesize the founding fathers, but don't hold them in reverence, hold them in contempt. By and through their intervention, slaves you are, and slaves you will ever be. An example of a man in history we have been taught to revere is Benjamin Franklin. Would it shock you to learn that he was on the king's payroll and his many trips to England was actually to report on the colonial government to King George?
The Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of Independence is another story omitted from our American history books. Of the 51 men involved in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, 21 were actually traitors and on the king's payroll. During the Revolutionary War, English officers were provided the names, addresses, and family members of these 30 loyalists involved in the creation and signing of the Declaration of Independence. The English soldiers had been ordered to hunt down and murder all 30 loyalists, their wives, children, and all relatives, with further instructions to burn their bodies inside their homes. The soldiers were to leave no trace of these men and their families, to wipe out their existence for an eternity. The history of civilizations has taught us all that martyrs are dangerous men of power, and King George didn't want to leave any martyrs. It is pretty obvious who provided the detailed information about the 30 loyalists, their family, and addresses. At first glance, it appeared that Guy Madison of Virginia was so concerned about lawyers holding any position in the American government that he championed the 13th Amendment, which barred lawyers from holding any public office in government. The 13th Amendment was ratified, but never made it into print in our government-controlled school books and public classrooms.
The concept that there is no jurisdiction over the people. Okay. And the concept that 14th Amendment took away all judicial power. Okay, guys, it doesn't work that way. You can believe in all this stuff. And if you want to have a discussion on whether or not it's right or wrong, we can have that discussion. But I will give the caveat that it has nothing to do in law and it won't work. The issue is not whether or not it's right or wrong. This is America. We don't care about right or wrong. They have all the guns. Even Ron Paul, when Ron Paul was asked to do the movie, and we went over all this stuff with him, and Ron Paul's a brilliant guy, he's a great guy. We have our issues, but he knows his stuff pretty well. He even said in the movie, and he wanted it in the movie. He was the one that said, yes, put this in the movie. It doesn't really matter what the law says. They have all the guns. So you can sit here and have an argument about right or wrong. I keep a bunch of copies of the original 13th Amendment. You can contact, you can't get it in Arizona, but you can contact the Secretary of State of Colorado. It's $25 for the first one. It's $12 for each additional one. You can just call them up. They'll take a credit card over the phone. You can say, I would like a copy, a certified copy from your office with your gold seal placed upon it of the original 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And they will tell you, okay, it's $25 for the first one, $13 for each additional one, or $12 for each additional one. It's such and such for mailing. How many do you want? We'll take your credit card right now. And within about 2 weeks, you'll have these copies of the original 13th Amendment of the Constitution, wherein it states very clearly that to be a lawyer in the United States, you have to give up your rights as a citizen, and you're no longer a citizen of the United States. You're not part of the United States. You have no rights. But you can't go down to the bookstore and buy a copy of the Constitution with that 13th Amendment in there. It was never abrogated. It was never thrown out. There is really the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, not the one that you think there is, because they moved everything down when they got rid of the 13th Amendment. But it's still there. It's still in law. I don't know how you would ever get a court to believe it. They'll lock you up. They have the guns.
The 13th Amendment was ratified but never made it into print in our government-controlled school books and public classrooms. The amendment was surreptitiously removed and replaced by the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment became the 14th, and so on. Madison's efforts appear admirable, but his later actions as a member of the First Congress suggest that his only real concern was to block lawyers from undermining the theft that he and his compatriots had planned for America. Once the cost of the Revolutionary War sufficiently placed the colonists in debt, the English soldiers were ordered to dispense with their efforts, recover their arms, and within the next 8 years, they eventually returned to England. The colonists were so glad to see the fighting stop that they allowed the soldiers to retreat and exit America peacefully. There is an old legal maxim that states, "The first to leave the field of battle loses." Pursuant to this maxim, the founding fathers proclaimed the colonists the victors. A maxim is a legal truth that is time-honored and incorruptible. In reality, the war was just a diversion. The colonists had no chance of succeeding in their efforts. Examine the facts for yourself. During this era, England had the largest army and navy in the world. King George owned England, Ireland, and France, having a combined population of about 60 million subjects. The colonists were poorly educated, poorly armed, and composed of farmers, tradesmen, bonded slaves, women and children, and boasted a total population of only 3 million subjects. And considering the undermining that was occurring to their nation by the king's spies and the founding fathers, the colonists didn't have a prayer of defeating the English. Americans have been indoctrinated by our federal and state governments and through government-controlled public schools and literature, government-controlled media, and government-controlled churches. Yes, even the churches, to believe that America defeated the English. We celebrate that victory in our so-called independence each year on the 4th of July, and it is all a bunch of propaganda, a carrot to lead the horse and keep this society stupid and passive. We boast today that our country represents the finest schools in the world, but in reality, we're no smarter than the first colonists. We'll know more about other things because of new technology developments during the last 250 years, and yet the average IQ of America is 70. Documented proof that the Constitution was not for us can be found in Powderford Fay and Company versus Mayor and Alderman of the City of Savannah. This was a court case wherein the plaintiffs sued the City of Savannah for violating what they believed were their constitutionally protected rights. The decision of the judge says it all. But indeed, no private person has the right to complain by suit in court on the ground of a breach of the Constitution. The Constitution, it is true, is a compact, but he, the private person, is not a party to it.
The Public Trust Fund.
That was a lot of information to unpack. Did you take the 8th grade test? That was something in itself. How many of you have seen Suits? It's available on Netflix. The premise is that there's this guy, really smart. He gets to work for a major law firm which only accepts Harvard graduates. However, he has not graduated nor finished law school. But he is very brilliant. He knows the books, he knows the laws, he knows a lot of stuff. So this guy hires him. You know how they say Hollywood puts the truth in film? That's exactly what this is. And if you haven't seen this new series they have called Bodies, also on Netflix, you should definitely check it out. It's a little bit hinky, but the premise of how people with this elitist mindset will go through any lengths necessary to maintain control and have power over people, yeah, it's very telling. And I just wanted to show one more thing. There was a photo shown of Mayor Amschel Bauer, who is actually Mayor Amschel Rothschild. That was not him. That was actually what's this guy's name? That was Albert Pike they showed. This is Mayor Amschel, right? Or a rendering of him. But if you go right here on YouTube, you could see the amount of money that these people have at their disposal. Imagine doing this for 400 years, putting people in debt, and then collecting the spoils of war from either side. Would you not be filthy rich as well? Something to think about. So again, I hope it was not too much to take in, but this is the kind of information that I'm talking about disseminating. And of course, there's more to come. So stay tuned. Be sure you subscribe to the channel. Like it, share it with like-minded people. Until next time, I'm out. Peace.